Tayari Plaza in Halo 3 ODST is a decent little mission. It's not going to win any awards for being the most breathtaking experience you'll ever work your way through in the series, but it does a lot right and sets things up nicely for the story which follows. Given it's the first proper level in the game, discounting the rookie's initial exploration of New Mombasa immediately prior, there's not a whole lot to catch up on before we jump into things proper. Halo 3 ODST begins with a group of, you guessed it, ODSTs comprised of Buck, Dare, Dutch, Mickey, Romeo and the Rookie, preparing to assault a Covenant ship floating above New Mombasa. The squad begins their mission, but as they plummet towards their destination, they run into a couple of issues. First, their objective changes, and so Dare sets a new trajectory, and then the Covenant ship enters slipspace, emitting an EMP which prevents the drop pods from deploying their parachutes. After losing consciousness, the Rookie awakens 6 hours later alone on the empty city streets, and so begins the search for his missing comrades under cover of night. Continuing to look for any signs of life, well, human life at least, you'll eventually make it to the Tayari Plaza and the building housing a TV screen with Dare's recon helmet stuck in it.
You gonna tell us her name, Gunny?
Ms. Naval Intelligence. Our new boss. Oh, brother. So check your mouths, find your chairs, and get set for a combat drop.
There's no better place, I think, to touch on Bungie's use of New Mombasa and the various objects you find as a framing device than here, although I will make it very brief as it's technically not part of the mission itself, and I do plan to discuss it in more detail as part of a longer video looking at the game in its entirety. In short, it's an extremely effective way to reconcile Halo's usual mission-based approach with something a touch more open. It's the approach I'd hoped Halo Infinite would take, with you being ferried off to individual story missions set in their own locations, so that more traditional levels could be fit into the open world experience. Especially here at the start of ODST, the contrast between the film noir atmosphere of the more exploratory nighttime sections and the daytime action-orientated sequences works wonderfully. It helps the first of the campaign's flashbacks land with real impact. Tayari Plaza itself begins right around the time the Rookie was knocked out, as Buck crash lands alone in New Mombasa. This is followed by a conversation with Dare.
Did I do something wrong? Because the only thing I regret about you and me, not knowing you were a spook when we first met. I would have been a lot less charming.
That's what I missed most about you, Buck. Well, your mouth was always a little faster than your brain.
I've said it before and I'll say it again, I really like how Bungie handles the pair's relationship. The trilogy which precedes it is rightfully focused less on the smaller relationships between individual characters, other than of course between Master Chief and Cortana, and more on its overarching story. That was the correct decision, considering how much needed to play out across the 3 titles. Here there's much more of an interest in the interpersonal, and it came as no great surprise to me to see that trend continued into Reach as well, where we see it to an even greater extent amongst Noble Team. I've always considered ODST in story terms to be a testbed of sorts for Reach, with Bungie beginning to explore the impact of the war with the Covenant within a group dynamic as opposed to previous games being more about the individual. Buck and Dare's relationship is the focal point in that regard, with the characters around them definitely less built out than those in Reach, but nevertheless these early stages are as clear an indicator as any as to how Bungie wanted to shape their narratives moving forwards. Probably my favourite thing about Tayari Plaza is its aesthetic and atmosphere, which work particularly well at its outset. There's something so bleak but also beautiful about the blue tinge layered on top of the grey surroundings, with particle effects of the same colour filling the air around you. The beginning of the track More Than His Share, also known as Into the Breach, playing in the background now, is also a track I don't hear mentioned much when Halo's music is discussed, but it should be, as it's superb. It's not as in-your-face catchy as other popular songs in the game, but its female vocals pair perfectly with the initial firefights in the street, and it's one of the first tunes that springs to mind when I think about ODST. There's an interesting detail which can be found in one of the buildings just before you team up with a squad of Marines. The bodies of both brutes and elites can be found scattered across its upper level, hinting at Covenant infighting, a precursor perhaps to the Great Schism which has yet to take place. There are 1 or 2 other places you can find similar too. It's definitely of some importance, as Buck even comments on it.
School zone. Please, slow down.
What the hell happened here?
Final notice. Bill past due.
I've always wondered whether the superintendent's dialogue, "Final notice, bill past due," has any meaning. An achievement is named after it, the one for beating the levels part-time, but if anyone thinks it has any connection to the scene you come across, do shout in the comments. I ask because there's clearly meaning in other places. For example, towards the end of Tayari Plaza, the superintendent mentions the lower levels, which is presumably a reference to where Dare went next, the underground data hive.
Attention, travelers. Lost items can be claimed on lower level.
It's definitely food for thought. When I ranked Halo 3 ODST's missions in a video you can watch by clicking the card on screen now, I put Tayari Plaza at the bottom of my list. For those of you who have already watched it, you may then quite rightly be asking the question, Ben, how could you begin this video by describing Tayari Plaza as a decent little mission when you think it's the weakest in the game? Well, I'm glad you possibly asked, allow me to explain. I actually don't think this mission is a bad one at all. In fact, as far as the worst levels in different Halo games go, this is by far one of the most enjoyable. At no point is there ever anything I can honestly point to as bad design, but equally, there's not much I'd single out as being amazing either. It's very middle of the road with fairly standard encounters, some decent level design with a surprising amount of verticality in places considering it's set on a city's streets, and some above average storytelling. That's all it really needed to be. After all, it's the game's first mission, it's there to help you get acquainted with things. Dare even gives you one or two handy hints as you progress.
Got a little jackal problem.
An overcharged plasma pistol shot will neutralize their shield. It should also take down a brute's armor.
Oh yeah? Where were you a minute ago?
Still trapped inside my car.
My decision to place it at the bottom of my list then was less an indicator of its poor quality and more of ODST's campaign not featuring any real stinkers. I must also admit, Tayari Plaza's impact on me has lessened over time more than some other levels have. When I originally played it, I was really excited, as it felt much closer to the style of intense street fight against the Covenant in a human city I'd wanted than Halo 2's missions perhaps had, or closer to the E3 2003 trailer for Halo 2, which I continue to be obsessed with. However, since then we've had Exodus in Reach, which is the best example by far, and so nowadays Tayari Plaza, while entertaining enough, doesn't have the unique selling point it once did for me. The mission's final proper encounter is its best. Up until this point, everything has been fairly narrow, but here there is quite a bit more to think about. You've got brutes shooting at you from an upper level, jackals posted behind them, and enemies at ground level to contend with, all out for your blood in an arena much bigger than any encountered so far. Combined with the pair of hunters which arrive on the scene later on, it's a solid sequence that brings out the best of ODST's city combat in a more structured manner than that featured during the nighttime free roam sections. Arriving at Dare's drop pod, you'll find a few remaining grunts who aren't the sharpest knives in the drawer as they stand stationary firing at the empty pod. Once they've been dealt with, Buck meets his first engineer, beginning the setup for the larger story being told, links up with Romeo, and Tayari Plaza comes to an end.
What the heck was that? You ever seen one before? Hey, Romeo, you got your ears on? Oh, I get it. Permission to speak, smartass.
No, I don't know what it was, but it was gonna grease your ass good. Just like it did the captain.
Tayari Plaza is a level I would describe as dependable. It doesn't do anything particularly exciting, but it also doesn't do anything decidedly egregious either, which I suppose is what you want from the first mission in a shooter. Its early street combat gives you a bit of time to get going in environments which aren't overly complicated, before you're thrown into a far larger skirmish towards its end. Add the odd interesting detail here and there, such as the dead elites and brutes, and some interpersonal drama between Buck and Dare, and what you get is an experience which admittedly doesn't set the world alight, but is always entertaining. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a bucking great time, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know your thoughts, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.